Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
How long has this been going on? I asked softly. Claire's eyes widened as she gasped. Peter, I have no idea what you're talking about. Stop this right now. Her voice aimed for anger and disbelief, but the undercurrent of worry was unmistakable. I remained silent, my gaze fixed on her. What I felt most in that moment wasn't anger. It was sadness. Sadness that it had come to this. I'd given everything I had, and this was how it was repaid. My name is Peter Collins. I first met Claire Brown about 15 years ago at a university in Atlanta. I was the only child of pecan farmers in southern Georgia, raised by parents who were determined to see their one and only go to college. No matter the cost, as my daddy used to say. I went, I succeeded, and then everything fell apart. My parents were killed in a car crash when they were coming to meet me because I had ended up in the hospital due to a couple of badly broken legs as a result of falling on the icy steps in January. It didn't get frosty very often, and I wasn't used to it. Falling down was my own fault, and I signed a waiver saying I wouldn't sue the university. I just wasn't looking where I was going. So, there I was, laid up in traction and finding out from a grim-faced Georgia state trooper that I was an orphan. Life sure was grand. I spent a month in the hospital, and it was the worst month of my life. As the bones itched and I gobbled up rose hips, I sobbed into my pillow at night and put on a game face during the day. I'd be damned if I'd let any of these a-holes see me cry. When they finally let me out, I had no financial aid, no place to live, and no prospects. And of course, I had a giant pile of hospital bills I hadn't a hope of paying. My parents, as I said, were a couple of pecan farmers, and they sure as hell didn't have any savings. We lived paycheck to paycheck, and every spare dollar went into my college fund. That fund quickly disappeared, though, and I had to get a job on my newly healed legs. I ended up qualifying for work-study and went to work in the campus bookstore, which is where I met Claire Brown and where the rest of my life began. She came strolling into the bookstore one gorgeous September day and took my heart away. Now I have always been a fan of the more voluptuous body shape. Scrawny hips and scant thighs and flat stomachs never interested me. I guess it came from my farming stock. Skinny farmers and farmers' wives didn't eat well, and were thus not prosperous and wouldn't make good mates, or some damn shit, I don't know. All I know is that throughout my less than prolific dating career, I'd almost always gone for the bigger girls. Well, let me be a little more clear, in the interests of total honesty. I had always looked at them, but to that date, I had never even so much as touched another girl, other than my mother in my entire life. Girls had no interest in me, a poor pecan farmer. I didn't play sports. I didn't join any extracurricular activities that were acceptable. My days were spent at school or working on the farm, and my nights were spent doing my homework. To be honest, I was surprised I got accepted into the university, but can only guess that it was my good test scores that did it. I had a 4.0 GPA, and I got a pretty decent score on my SATs. So, yeah, I never had a date or a kiss. One time, I asked a girl out and she made up a flimsy excuse as to why she couldn't go with me, but she would never look at me, and I got the picture. I got it real quick. No girl is gonna go out with you, Peter. I spent the nights of all the school dances at home. I didn't attend any of the homecoming dances, junior or senior prom. I wasn't in the yearbook, and nobody but my parents clapped for me at my graduation. The principal didn't even look at me as he handed me my diploma, and I didn't attend any of the graduation parties. I went home and fertilized the pecan trees. I had no friends, and hardly anybody ever said a word to me all through high school, other than excuse me or get out of the way. So, I went off to university figuring it'd be pretty much the same there, and I was right. I was just one of many freshmen. Nobody gave me a second glance. Nobody wished me well. Nobody shook my hand. I didn't even have a roommate to talk to. I was the quintessential outsider. I stood off in the darkness beyond the campfire, as it were. I tried striking up conversations, but people, especially girls, made quick exits and found excuses not to be anywhere near me. It all came crashing back on me while I was lying in the hospital. There is nothing that brings on the acuity of loneliness than being all by yourself in a hospital bed, knowing nobody will come visit you or hold your hand. Once I found out my parents had died, I really was completely alone in the world. Both my parents were only children whose own parents had died some years ago, being quite old themselves. I had no aunts, no cousins, nobody at all. I got out of the hospital feeling depressed and wanting to do nothing but crawl into a liquor bottle, except I couldn't even afford to do that. So eventually I got that bookstore job, and Claire Brown came in, which is where I was before I got sidetracked. Now, you know how they say that the eyes are the windows to the soul? If that was the case, looking into Claire's sparkling green eyes was like looking into a mansion lit up for a Christmas party. I was sitting behind the counter totaling up receipts in preparation for closing, when the door jingled and in she walked. I looked up and fell into her eyes. It was like I'd been struck by lightning. I felt the spark jump. I must have stared at her for only a couple of seconds, but it felt like an eternity. She had short blonde hair that feathered around her ears and those captivating green eyes. She was short and wide, just the way I liked them. I forgot all about the receipts and just stared. "See something green?" she asked, startling me and smiling. I jumped guiltily and looked away. No, not at all. And now, even to this day, I don't know what made me say it, but I blurted out, "Would you like to go to dinner with me tonight?" She raised her eyebrows but didn't look at all put out of countenance. "Sure, why not? You look right enough." That was the start of my courtship. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't alone. We did everything together. We had a million things to talk about, and we were rarely seen out of one another's sight. I'm afraid that, like almost anyone else who hasn't had a great deal, I got rather possessive of Claire. And we did have a few issues. Now, being alone most of my life, I took on the habit of watching people. I think I've become quite a fairly decent amateur anthropologist as a result. Being male, most of my attention was obviously directed at women. There isn't a woman alive, fat or thin, who is happy with her body. I don't care what she says, there is always something. And there isn't a fat girl alive who actually does like being fat. I've watched women ever since I've been able to appreciate them, and this is what I've discovered. Even a fat girl who doesn't really mind that she's fat, bows to the thin is the only way to be pressure. She will diet, with greater or lesser degrees of success. She'll try to wear thin clothing, and get more depressed when she gets odd looks. Because let's face it, a dress designed for a thin woman does not look good on a fat one. They have totally different shapes. But the woman in question tries to fit in, no pun intended, and gets more depressed when she can't. This is just an example of some of the stuff I've observed. Claire had a number of issues related to her weight. She was used to being propositioned by men who thought fat girls were easy lays, but thankfully she had enough self-respect to avoid that type. Nevertheless, she had just about despaired of finding a man who didn't do that to her, and was extremely suspicious. I think part of that suspicion never went away, which led us to our current difficulties. As a result of this suspicion, she wanted to go to her wedding bed a virgin. I, being totally and completely in love, had no problem with that. I was still happy. I did my best, every day, to show her that I loved her. I was understanding about her complaints about her belly and hips and thighs even though I had no problem with them and told her so at every opportunity. She just never believed me. No woman on earth ever believes a man, not fully, when he tells her he loves her body. Not even after years of being together. I doted on her, and I got a little possessive. As a result, our relationship wasn't all roses. More than once, she complained I was smothering her, and I did my best to back off. But I was so terrified of losing her, I didn't want to let go. I had nobody all my life but my parents, and they died, and I was all alone for real. And then she, this incredible woman who was the meaning of life itself to me, came along, and I grabbed on with all I had. So, we had a number of fights, where she told me I was controlling and not allowing her to have a life of her own, and I said I'd try to do better, and I'd promise to do my best to control my possessive nature. Eventually I did loosen up, and by the time I graduated with my computer science degree, and she graduated with her degree in human resources, we were engaged to be married and she was all smiles. When we got married, my wedding night was every bit as magical as I thought it would be. Her big soft body just melted around me, and I told her how beautiful she was. She smiled and pretended to believe me, but as I said, no woman ever really believes a man when he tells her how beautiful she is, and especially a fat woman with all those years of thin pressure behind her. We got jobs in our fields, me at a medium-sized IT services company, and she at a bank managing personnel. We got a house in the suburbs, and were living the American dream. I kept doing my best to prove how much I loved her, cheered with her for her career triumphs, and commiserated with her over her downsides. We cried together when I found out I would be unable to father children because of an extremely low sperm count. Everything coasted along for 15 years, until that overheard phone conversation. It was the cliché of all clichés. I had forgotten some of my coding manuals, and so I sent an email to my boss letting him know I had to run home and grab them. It was about 11:15 on a Tuesday, and I hurried down to my car. Claire had told me she wasn't feeling well, so I gave her a mug of tea and a kiss on the forehead, and a promise to try and get home early to take care of her. I hurried into my Jeep and drove through the quiet streets to my house. All was as I had left it. I had a small office off the garage with a phone extension, and I hurried in there, hunting through my shelf of manuals for the right one. I picked up the phone to call Jack, the other programmer on my team, to verify which manual it was I needed, but before I could dial, I heard a voice on the phone. "I'm looking forward to banging you," said a man's voice, low and husky, each word sliding like an ice pick into my brain. Claire giggled, sounding not at all ill. "I'm looking forward to it myself. Tomorrow at 3? Better believe it, sweet cheeks," the unknown man said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. What followed were the arrangements for setting up a hotel rendezvous. From the sounds of it, Claire and this unknown man were extremely familiar with each other, trading endearments and sexual innuendos like candy. This suggested to me that this affair, or whatever the hell it was, had been going on a long time and was not a one-time thing. Rage boiled up inside me, and I wanted nothing more than to storm in there and beat the living shit out of her. But that quickly passed, and my analytical programmer's mind kicked in, collating a number of facts and drawing conclusions. Remember how I said no woman believes her man when he says he thinks she's beautiful? I began to draw this conclusion after 15 years of marriage with Claire. The first year, things were great in the sex department. She never turned me down, would even initiate it. She would take any opportunity to purr in my ear, in that way a woman does. When you're really in love and a woman purr in your ear like that, it makes you feel like you could just climb to the top of the highest mountain and scream with joy that this lovely creature is yours, all yours. That all began to taper off gradually, though. When I told her how beautiful she was, she'd only smile half-heartedly at me and give me a perfunctory thanks. Sex dropped off to once a week, then once a month, and finally maybe once every couple of months, but only if I pressed hard for it. And she would always sigh. In that way only a woman can do, like she's doing you a big favor by even consenting to be in your presence. I'm sure all you guys know the sigh I'm talking about. Now, as I stood there in my little office, I tried to remember the last time I had been allowed to have sex with my wife, and I thought it was back in February. It was now November. She had lain there, not responding to my caresses and nibbles until I decided to just get it over with. It was totally unsatisfying. I tried to start something last week, and she'd slapped my hands away and said, "Not now. Go use your hand. Why don't you?" That had really hurt. Now I find out the reason I had been cut off was she was getting it somewhere else. That really pissed me off. She cut me, her husband, off, so that she could go screw some stranger. What the hell? Standing in my office, fresh from hearing that phone call, with a more mature view on things, I wondered if I married her because she was the first girl to ever really give me any attention. Thinking on it for a moment, I decided it didn't matter. I still loved her with all my heart, and what she had done had torn it right out. Right then I decided to find out everything I could about her affair or affairs, and then I'd confront her. Then I'd divorce her. She obviously didn't want me anymore and was just using me for a meal ticket or some damn thing. I was only the man who tried to prove he loved her and kept trying for 15 years. Who was this Daniel come lately? Now, I gotta be honest here. I know that most men aren't attracted to fat girls, and my wife was definitely fat, at 5'2" and 280 pounds, despite going on numerous diets over the years. So, what the hell did this guy see in her? I know that's not a charitable thing to think about your wife, but I had to be realistic. But I decided it really didn't matter. She was cheating on me, lying to me, crapping all over our marriage. While I was thinking about this, I used my cell to call Jack and verified the manual I needed and got the hell out of there without letting Claire know I was there. I had some digging to do, and I didn't want to give the game away. She knew me pretty well and might figure something was up by my facial expression. I went back to work and did my job, keeping the plots and plans tucked away in the back of my mind. I would reveal my hand when the time was right. 3 weeks later, I had a wealth of information. I was the one who took care of the computers around our house, and I had keyloggers installed on all our machines. Claire had either forgotten that, or she didn't give much of a damn if I found out what she was up to. She had changed the passwords on her email accounts and browser, but because of the keyloggers, I was able to get that information pretty easily. Seems my loving wife had been conducting affairs on a website geared for getting laid and had met a number of men from there over the past year. Through the saved emails, I pieced together what was happening. She listened to them flatter her, tell her how hot and sexy she was, blah blah blah. Eventually, after some time, she met with them at motels and got well screwed. No wonder I wasn't getting any. I was only her husband, after all. I decided to take a poker approach. I wouldn't show my entire hand. I would only come at her with Ethan, her latest assignation, and find out how truthful she would be. I printed out emails and got hotel receipts, and I even got pictures from a PI for whom I had done computer repairs. I got a discount from him because I had managed to save his entire client list and all his data. I sat in the darkened living room and waited for Claire to get home. She was at the Super 8 hotel downtown with Ethan, getting screwed but good, according to the PI. I sat, I drank coffee, and I waited. 2 hours later, at 9 p.m., Claire came in, looking happy and humming a bit. She started a little when she saw me sitting in the dark living room, idly rocking and cradling a coffee cup. Peter, you scared me. What are you doing here? How long have you been screwing him? I asked gently. Claire gasped. Peter, I have no idea what the hell you're talking about. Stop this at once. The tone was trying very hard for anger and incredulity, but sounded more worried than anything. Come over here and sit down, my dear wife, and do it right now, I said, still speaking calmly, almost sounding friendly. Looking dazed, Claire came over and sank into the couch across from me, her face pale, the happiness I had seen on it earlier nowhere in evidence. Now, how long have you been screwing Ethan Carter? I asked again. Who is that? She was trying again for indignation, but sounding only weak. I didn't answer, just continued to stare at her. She couldn't meet my gaze and looked away at the wall behind me. For weeks, she said, whispering now. I nodded. Thanks for being honest for once. Is he the only one? Yes, I swear, she said, but she still didn't meet my eyes. I nodded gently and smiled. So the names, let's see. Henry Marshall, Nathan Taylor, James Whitaker, Daniel Reed and Victor Bennett would mean nothing to you, right? She gasped. How daft. Never mind how. I want to know why, Claire. Why did you do this to us? She put her face in her hands and cried. I wasn't moved at all by her tears. They meant nothing, only that she was caught. Her betrayal had turned my heart into ice. I waited. Finally, she got a grip on herself and looked back up at me. Even puffy and red, she was still the most beautiful woman I knew. I hated and loved her. I needed and detested her. Peter, I love you, she said. I snorted, but said nothing. I do. Really? With those other guys, it was just sex. Uh-huh, I said. Sex you weren't giving me. She looked guilty, but I didn't believe it for a second. Well, they made me feel beautiful, she said. I know I'm fat, but they made me feel sexy and desirable. And what did I do? Make you feel hideous? I was starting to get mad now, but I ruthlessly suppressed it. You're my husband. You're supposed to say those things, she said, looking totally convicted now. I know you were just telling me that because you had to. So, what? You thought you would go out and find other guys to tell you that you were beautiful? Never mind our wedding vows. Never mind what it would do to me? Is that about the size of it, Claire? Listen, Peter, it's not like that. I found this whole trove of sites online about men who like big girls. It was like a whole new world for me. I know you said you like me, but you're my husband. You're supposed to say that. So, when I put up the profile and got all these responses, it was like a big rush for me. I don't know how to explain it. The funny thing was, I sort of understood what she was saying. Feeling sexy and desirable, feeling like somebody wanted you. I know that feeling. I thought I had it with my wife. Guess I was wrong. I see. Well, my lawyer will be in touch with you to work out all the details, I said, rising from my recliner and starting to head for the bedroom to grab my suitcase, which was already packed. Peter? What lawyer? You're not divorcing me, are you? You cheated on me, Claire. The first time you hit the submit button on your first profile. The first time you sent sexy pictures to Victor or whoever your first sex buddy was. The first time you shut the first motel door on me, you cheated. And I refuse to live with a cheating bitch like you. She started to cry in earnest, but I was unmoved and went to get my suitcase. I gave her everything I had and she took it and threw it back in my face. I left the house, suitcase in hand, and slammed the door on her wails. I still loved the stupid bitch, but I wasn't going to comfort her. Not after all I'd done, and after all she'd done. I gave her half my adult life, and she tossed it away for some cheap thrills. I got in my car and headed for a cheap apartment I had found near work. I'd give my lawyer the papers tomorrow. I just wanted the marriage over with. I didn't want to inflict any damage on her. She ripped all the fight out of me. For a while, however, I was tempted to just let her do her thing. At least I wouldn't be alone. But then I realized I already was. She'd given herself to others, and the only thing with me was her body. Her mind was elsewhere. The divorce went through without much of a fuss. Claire tried to talk with me, but I didn't want to listen. She had nothing to say that I wanted to hear. Even though I knew, intellectually, that no woman ever really believes her man when he says she is beautiful, I thought Claire would believe me enough to not try to seek verification outside the marriage. 6 months after that tense confrontation in the living room, the divorce was finalized. I heard Claire had moved to Tennessee to be with Ethan. Word was, he had introduced her to the swinger community up there. Maybe she found the affirmation she was seeking from them. I honestly didn't care. As for me, life returned to a hollow rhythm. I continued working at my IT job and living in my modest apartment. I didn't date, didn't socialize much. It felt like high school and college all over again. Lonely, uneventful, and disconnected. No relationships, no nights out. I resigned myself to the idea that this was how it would always be. Alone, looking in from the outside. The 15 years I spent married to Claire felt like a mirage, a temporary escape from a life that had never truly changed. Over time, I came to believe there were no such things as happy endings, just varying degrees of bad outcomes. In cases of betrayal, there are no winners, only losers. Everyone ends up broken in their own way. 5 years after the divorce, I learned Claire had died. She'd been murdered by someone she'd met online, a horrific act of violence that ended her life. I found myself wondering if, in her final moments, she still believed in the beauty and allure she'd sought so desperately. But even those dark thoughts didn't linger. By then, I was numb, detached, and, frankly, indifferent. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.